What do you currently do?
So I was an academic at the University of Southampton for over 20 years. I've since retired from that, but I now run a tech startup with a bunch of university students.
What has been the most important lesson that life has taught you?
I think an important lesson to learn in life that I've learned is the ability to spot when an opportunity comes up that's worth taking. And that involves several things. First of all, to maximize the chance of an opportunity occurring that's going to be at least worth considering, you need to get out and meet lots of people. Meeting people is a really key thing. Of course, there are some people who manage to change the world based on sitting at a desk and doing some really clever stuff. But for most of us, we need to get out and meet people. We need to figure out who we want to work with. And we need to meet people who can present us with interesting opportunities that at least we can consider. And that's another kind of important point of the journey, which is developing the ability to figure out, okay, this opportunity has come up. Should I take it? Is it going to offer me other opportunities? Is it going to significantly take me in a direction that creates meaning or value, however you want to define value in your life? So it's those kind of lessons, I think, that are very, very important. And probably when I was younger, in my early 20s, I didn't fully appreciate what these days is called the power of networking, right? There was clearly no online social networks or anything of that sort, but still necessary to meet people, figure out what the opportunities are, and also to be in a position where there are people who are older than you, further on in their journey than you, that can help you, inspire you, help you, maybe mentor you. So those are really important things. That's a lesson I learned, and that's the kind of lesson that I like to impart to young people that I work with.
Who is one person that you met along your journey that really changed things for you?
Well, there would be kind of several people that would come into that category. There was a professor at the University of Southampton when I joined, who was really very, very helpful to me at that point in my career, in not just helping and advising, but creating opportunities and suggesting things that would be good to do at the start of a university career. And there have been other people along the way as well, similarly, pretty much all academics, who've just in small ways suggested things. These are little nudges, right, that get you going in the right direction. And many of these people I'm still in touch with. And I think it's really important that you learn to nourish the relationships that you've got, right? You need to continually be in touch with people. You need to be meeting people wherever possible. And you certainly need to be in reasonably regular contact in some kind, even if it's only by email or, WhatsApp message or whatever, to be kind of feeding and nurturing those relationships. And that is, or can be, an extremely powerful way to help you to shape your career or your path through life, whatever that, however you want to go in that direction.
Looking back on your life, what is a particular decision that you are really proud of?
I think that there's a number of things that I've done that I wouldn't necessarily put them down to a particular decision, because that kind of implies there's some kind of momentous blinding flash of light. Oh, I now say there's nothing like that I would bring in here. I suppose the most important thing for me in my kind of personal professional journey was the opportunity that I created to do the research that I did at Southampton. And this was the realization in the early 1990s of the emerging power of the web as it was those days, and how that could potentially be harnessed for social good by connecting young people in various ways. So that would go back right to the early 1990s. And having recognized that, I then set up the research that I did at the University of Southampton and pursued that. That resulted in my thesis in the early 2000s, but it also resulted in a lot of opportunities to go and speak to people, work with other people in other countries. And that's probably the thing that made me professionally, right? That's the thing that got me recognized for the research that I was doing, won an award in the late 1990s for this online social network of young people. And I was very fortunate as well at Southampton in working with a bunch of people who were similarly inspired by what the World Wide Web, as we were calling it in those days, had to promise. Of course, at that stage, none of us foresaw the rise of things like Facebook and the kind of social media platforms that have produced so many problems these days. And that was a very optimistic time to be working in that field, right? But nevertheless, that does feel good to be part of that journey. And I still think about, as I put into practice all that I learned in building online social networks then with what I'm doing now, I still think about the work that we were doing and the real excitement that there was there. If you think back to nearly 30 years ago, 1997, 1998, the web was only just coming into people's general consciousness. So that was a really good time to be working in that field. And I was very fortunate to be in a situation that enabled me to pursue that. And that had arisen because of decisions that I'd made earlier in my life. So you can kind of imagine, as you look back, you can see these points, these potential kind of splitting points. You did that. Okay, so you went up here and then all of these things. It's that old thing, right? It's Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher, who didn't exactly say this, but it's usually kind of written as this in English. Life must be lived forward, but understood backwards. Okay, it's only when you look back on stuff that you think, oh, well, okay, that's why I'm here now, because that happened there, and I made that decision.
What values or set of principles do you think have guided your decisions and helped you in your achievements?
That's a great question, because personal values are very important as you live your professional life. Yes, I've always sought to do things that would, in general, benefit other people, but particularly would benefit young people. So all of my professional work has been concerned with working to help young people in many cases, in many of the things that I've done, helping young people to understand science better and get an understanding of science that involves not just the scientific principles, but understanding the application of science, understanding the values that scientists have, understand how scientific knowledge is produced. All of that work has been based on the idea that young people, through their education, deserve the best possible deal, right? In order to equip them as fully as possible to live in a complex technological society.
Knowing what you know now, if you could go back and give a piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Be more commercial in the sense of understand that you need to be always thinking not just about the intangible values that you're generating, but the value that you generate for yourself. Now, I'm perfectly fine as far as the financial value that I've generated for myself. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm quite comfortable with that. But thinking about applying that to young people now, the value, the financial value that you need to generate for yourself now as a young person in your early 20s is vastly different to how it was when I was in my early 20s, when, for example, house prices were lower and when salaries were generally higher, much higher. So young people, as they think about what they want to do with their futures, are having to make very careful decisions, and in some cases trade-offs about, I would like to be going in this direction, but I know if I go in this direction, that chimes with my personal values, but I'm not sure that I can live a comfortable life financially if I do that. And whatever you do in your 20s, it's a time for figuring out what you're really good at and making sure that you're as good as possible, good as you can be at that, right? It doesn't matter whether it's, whether you're an accountant or a lawyer or a social worker or a doctor, whatever it happens to be, you've got to figure out how to be the best one of those. And then how are you going to build on that to make your career? It is a very difficult time in your 20s, I think. And I know that when we reach our early 20s, most of us feel, well, we're pretty much grown up by now. Something that there's not life that's taught me, it's reading some neuroscience books and listening to some lectures that have taught me, actually, it's not until your mid-20s, really, that you're, completely intellectually developed. And in your early 20s, you are still in that transition from being a teenager to being an adult. And that can be a really quite difficult time to make those kinds of decisions about what you want to do, which again is where a network helps people, being connected to people that are, in their late 20s, in their mid 30s. These people have gone through this stage and can help you at that stage to understand what you might need to do. And now, at least through all the technologies that we have at our disposal, that's a lot easier for young people now in many ways, where prior to the internet age and social media age, making those connections and meeting those people, much harder, much harder. If you're 22, 23, or even younger, how do you find those people who are that bit further on from you, who can give you the kind of advice that you need? A few people are very lucky they've got an older sibling, who's kind of 5 years or so older than them, and that, that's really helpful. But most people are not in that position. So it's finding and developing those kinds of relationships and having the opportunity to be connected to people. That's something that is really super important. And I think it's important that people mid-career and further on in their careers, I think it's a moral importance for those people to pay back to the people that are younger than them, so that they're supporting them, not necessarily through mentoring, but through advising and looking out for them, because that makes knowledge needs to be handed down. And even more than knowledge, let me make a distinction. Wisdom, which is very, very different to knowledge. You need access to that. You can't beat talking to somebody who's kind of 20 years older than you and has seen a lot of this stuff before, because so much stuff is cyclical. Yeah, we've been through stuff before. There are many differences now to how it was 25, 30 years ago. Technologies change, and they change at an exponential rate. The world is very different. Nevertheless, as you look back on the 1980s, the 1990s, you would say, yeah, I learned from that, and this is an important lesson that we can bring to what we're doing now in the 2020s.
What keeps you hopeful about the future?
Young people. And there seem to be probably three kinds of existential problems that humankind faces, the most obvious of which is climate, environment, mass extinction of species, and so on. That's one thing. Then you've got artificial general intelligence, and how is that going to have an impact on people, through from kind of jobs and changing the nature of employment, through to even the complete extinction of the human race, according to some people. Okay, so that's another kind of problem. And the third kind of problem is the perennial human problem of the kind of society that we want, conflict between different societies, different sectors in society, different countries. So there's those three things. And in all of those, what I see in the very best young people coming through right now is a willingness to engage with these things and a willingness to solve them. I also see some very, very bright young people in the fields of technology and science, mathematics, which gives me great hope, because I have always felt that the solutions to certainly the first two kinds of problems that we've got, whether it's artificial intelligence or whether it's climate change and all of those kinds of things, ultimately human beings are very, very ingenious creatures, and also have an amazing ability to work together when you need to work together. And the source of inspiration to change those, for me, comes from, I see young people kind of stepping up to that. So I got great hope that through the generations coming through, human beings will still be around in 500 years.
If you could leave one piece of advice for young people today, what would it be?
The difference between wisdom and intelligence, right? I mean, clearly you can't be stupid and wise, but you don't need to be somebody who's kind of super academic to have a great deal of wisdom. You know, some of the wisest people in my life, my uncle, for example, he worked in the aircraft industry for many, many years. I mean, he was only a draftsman, He was a draftsman, right? In the days before AutoCAD and all of these kinds of programs, when you had literally offices full of guys with big sheets of paper and pencils and, rulers and all of this stuff, drawing out. And he was a passionate socialist. He was a member of the Labour Party. He was always out canvassing for the Labour Party, knocking on doors, doing all kinds of stuff. And he was actually talking to you, I realize, why I'm such a chatterbox, because his wife used to despair of him because he'd go out kind of into the centre of the town on a Saturday morning, get a few things. And, you know, she'd put lunch on the table, so it'd be 3, 4 o'clock before he came back, because he'd be talking to people. You know, he'd be stopping, talking to people. Lived in the town for years and years, so knew loads of people. He'd been a local councillor. You know, he was at school in the Second World War, so his schooling was very disrupted. Never went to university. Got a college education of some kind, but not, you know, super high level. Very wise man. Very wise. Great wisdom. So you don't need to be a professor at UCL to be wise, right? Because his life had taught him all kinds of things. Yeah, he was such an interesting guy to talk to. So, you know, you're very fortunate if you've got older people in your life. You know, if you're fortunate to have not just parents, but grandparents, uncles, you know, that kind of family that can pass on their wisdom to you, or you just sit and listen to them and hear their life stories. And I don't have, my father was one of many kids. He was the youngest of 9, 8 of who survived. But because he was the youngest, he never maintained very strong connections with his older siblings. I mean, some of them were kind of 25, 30 years older than him. So it was never a strongly connected family, and some had gone to Australia, some had gone to Canada, you know. So not got a huge family. So he would be somebody that I'd love to go back and talk to him. He was by far the most interesting member of our family. And he inspired me as well, because I was so into model aircraft when I was a young teenager. And he used to make model aircraft, and he used to make, you know, these plastic airfix kits, if you ever come across those. Yeah, I remember a model of, you know, first railway engine, Stephenson's rocket. I remember a model of that he made. I'd have been about 5. And so he would have been, I guess he'd have been about in his 20s at that point, late 20s. And he'd made this airfix kit of Stephenson's rocket. And the way I remember it was just so beautifully done, beautifully painted, beautifully put together. And it had a piece of railway track that you could push it along, and the pistons would move and the wheels would go so beautifully. You know, he was very, very good at that kind of stuff. And he was so into aircraft, you know. So